I think that the biggest draw for me to this work is really the importance that I find in developing intergenerational connection and creating social change. I think that we as young people have come into this world of social justice with a deep sense of motivation and a fiery passion that I think is fueled in a lot of ways by a real understanding that it's like in many social issues, we are the generation that needs to make change, substantial, divisive, definitive change. Um, it's it's everything from the climate crisis to the fact that there is a deadline on that. It's like we have to make change. And I think that young people there is a level of concern and fear and desire to protect and preserve our future for future generations. And sometimes in all of this extreme, this high level of passion and desire, and in some ways it's, deep senses of motivation, other ways it's anger or frustration with the world the way that it is, we forget some of the grounding principles of social justice action, or we forget some of the midway steps that create lasting and sustainable and community-centered change. And I think that when we begin to connect with other generations, not only does change become more sustainable, does it become more impactful, not only does each action that is taken impact a greater number of people in the population, you really start to have a movement which is spanning across all the different individuals in the planet, who each generation has their own language, their own ways and social structures that they've grown up in. And it's really important to involve all of them. I think it's about grounding and rediscovering our community aspect, and that includes all generations. And it means that at the same time as every generation has something important to contribute. Each and every generation can teach another generation important aspects, and especially for younger people talking with older people, it's like I, as an activist, want to surround myself with older individuals, because I really believe that there is a huge amount of knowledge and experiential learning that people that are older than me have gone through in life, and that they can share. Like, there is a massive amount of wisdom, which somewhere along the way, we started to kind of lose track of the importance of eldership and the importance of communicating with elders. For so long, they were the storytellers of villages and communities. They were the ones that passed down information. They were the link between what is in the past and what the future would be. And in so many ways, we've lost track of that. We don't sit down and talk with our elders. And so there is this we're going to keep repeating the same patterns over and over and over again, unless we begin to have conversations with people who've lived longer and had more experience, and then bring that new level of understanding into the present to create a better future. I mean, I think that that's a critical aspect of social justice.
What can I say? I'm supposed to be giving an overview, but I find myself so much entirely in agreement with what Jaden has just said that I feel like we could have switched roles, and he could have been speaking. He could have been writing an article that I would have written about elders and the life course. But of course, as soon as I say that, I realize that I'm not speaking the truth. Because why is it not the truth? Because Jaden and I are separated by a vast, vast amount. I was thinking about this morning, and I realized, Jaden, you're 18 years old, am I right?
Yeah.
I'm 76 years old. I said to myself, wait a minute, what does that mean? Supposing we think of ourselves not as, Jaden and Rick, but an 18-year-old and a 76-year-old. How much time does a 76-year-old have in the future? Answer. 76-year-old American male, 11 years. Actuarially speaking, that's my life expectancy. Now, I might die tomorrow, or I might become a centenarian. We don't know. But just looking at the averages, 11 years for the guy on this side of the screen. How about the guy on the other side of the screen? I looked it up. This is the age of Google, right? 58 years. I'm sorry, 59 years. So 59 plus 18 gives you 50, 57. That means I have 11 years to look forward to. Jaden has 57 years to look forward to. Let's be very concrete about it. Don't count on Moody being around after the year 2032. But Jaden, he's going to be here through 2080. Again, statistically speaking. So that means that if somebody like the national government says, well, we need to have climate change, blah, 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 and they say, we think we can achieve 50% reduction by the year 2050. That's a big year for Jaden, 2050. You got a lot of years to go. For me, I'm not going to be alive in the year 2050 in all probability. Very improbable, okay? I was born in 1945. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's a real difference here between how Jaden's future and Rick's future. But then I think to myself, well, wait a minute, what about the past? And then I think to myself, hey, wait a minute, Rick, you remember very well where you were when President John F. Kennedy, JFK, was assassinated. I can tell you exactly where I was standing when the news came to me. I was getting ready to meet my girlfriend for the Harvard-Yale football game. I went to Yale. I know where, I can picture it in my mind right now. I know exactly where I was standing, sitting actually on the airplane when September 11th happened. I was at LaGuardia Airport about to take off at 8:30 and the plane said, sorry, a plane has run into a building. We have to go back. I said, what is this big deal? I'm a lifelong New Yorker. So a plane went into a building, who cares? Kind of thing. I've been through the garbage strike, the electricity strike, subway strike. I've been through it all as a New Yorker. Then, of course, I spent the whole day at the airport watching, because we could see that day exactly the World Trade Center burning, the smoke, the whole bit. All right, I'm not interested in going on a sentimental journey about my past. I'm interested in mentioning that these are two events that for me are as if they happened yesterday. They happened before Jaden was ever born. I'm out of touch. I'm obsolete. I'm a specimen, like living history. So what can the young and the old really give each other? I don't have an answer to that question, but I'm here because I'm passionately concerned about that question, and I'm hoping that Jaden and I can come up with some answers. That's what I have to say.
Well, I think in response to everything that you just said is it's very much what I believe in terms of from my, my lens of social justice, of creating change and creating impactful change. It's like everything that you just talked about is what's so important, is that you've witnessed monumental moments of history that happened before I was ever even on this planet.
Right.
Like I can read about them in a textbook, but there's only so much that you can learn. There's a whole different aspect to like even just what you talked about. Is it's like I can sit and I can look up all the news stories and I can read every news story from 9/11, but there is a distinctly different aspect to sitting here and listening to you talk about sitting at LaGuardia and hearing the captain over the loudspeaker on a plane say, we got to go back. Like that is an entirely different lens, an entirely different story. Yes. And, it's that I think at least for me, and what I believe is for anyone that is like, for the people that really care about creating impactful change, about looking towards the future it's like, the past is incredibly important to remember. It's, it's filled with.
I think it is too. But I worry about elders, people like me, because people like me fall into the pattern of saying, well, let me tell you how it was, or let me tell you what you don't know type of thing. This is a great mistake. I say this as a grandfather, father of 2 children. The last thing in the world I need to do is to give advice to my daughter about how to raise her children. My wife feels the same way. But here's the issue. Maybe this stuff is all obsolete. And maybe the world that you're going to be facing in 2040, 2050 is a world that we can't even predict. I'm reminded of Kurt Vonnegut, who said, history is merely a list of surprises. It can only prepare us to be surprised again. And I think, wow, that's true of JFK's assassination. That's true of 9/11. But that's also going to be true of Jaden's life. How can anything I have to say prepare Jaden for surprises?
I think it's less about, at least in my mind, and from the conversations that I have, it's 2 aspects. It's one is acknowledging you can't prepare for the surprises of tomorrow. There's just, you can't.
You can't.
So there's the present moment and our present actions. And I think that our present actions have a lot, having the conversations with people who've lived longer than us, had more experience than us. And in many ways, it's like you come with a lot more lived and learned wisdom than maybe I have had in my entire life. Like the experiences that you've had have taught you things that I don't even know to even think about. So there's a level of conversation, which is it can support you in that present moment. I think that the other real big aspect of it is that it's not so much about the what. You can't be prepared for the what of a surprise in life, but
No, you
you
can't.
can definitely prepare for the how do I handle it. One of the things that we can learn about from our elders is it's like, you may not be able to tell me, oh, I lived through JFK's assassination. Here's what happened. Be prepared for this in your life. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, right.
you can't do that. But you
I
can
can't do
say
that.
is like, how did the country, how did you as a person, how did you as a community member, how did the country as a nation respond? Same with 9/11. You have experiences and understandings about how people's minds and people's perspectives and conversation and interpersonal connection shifted and
Yes.
community support shifted. And that's what we can draw from. That
I think
can
that's right.
change.
I
That's
do think that's
tangible.
right. I do think that's right. And I'm going to just bypass this question of wisdom, because the more I think about this, the more I realize that most of my wisdom consists of telling people all the mistakes that I've made in my life. And when we talk further, Jaden, about fundraising and things like that, marketing, I'll be telling you about all the things that I did wrong and what I learned from it. But that isn't what's really important. What I think is important, I was thinking about when I was getting ready for this talk today, I was thinking, wait a minute, JFK's assassination, 9/11, what's important about it is not what you can read in the books, but about the feelings. And back to your point, because I really agree with you so much about this importance. Obviously, we're on the same wavelength on social justice issues, but I see people advocating for social justice, and I don't see them telling the stories that are going to bring people around to what needs to be done. Now, maybe that's because some of the things that need to be done, the future, climate change, some of these things haven't happened yet. They're hypothetical. Why worry about the future? All that kind of stuff. But feelings are so critical. And this is something I think I'm going to give you here a cautionary tale from a 76-year-old. The next 58 years of your life, till you reach the point where I am, okay? Here's the bad news. It's also good news. The bad news is that you're going to forget almost all of it. You're going to forget almost all the things, almost all the people you meet, all the things that you do, all the things that you've learned. You haven't been to college yet. You'll forget that too, but you'll remember other things. And that's called emotional memory. And it's only been in the last few years, mainly because of my wife of 52 years, that I've begun to appreciate this. She's much better at this than I am, but I'm learning, okay? And it's what I try and teach in terms of marketing. Don't tell people what they should do. Tell a story, because the story will have the feelings, okay? And in my own half-baked way, I tried to do that with JFK. It was not JFK. It was my girlfriend. I was getting ready for, and it was not 9/11. It was, wait a minute, my flight is being canceled. So part of the message I think of this, and I'd like to talk to you even today about this, is how do we get people to take their private experience, which is very personal and narrow, and make it bigger? I don't know the answer to that. I think that's your challenge. That's your challenge in your life, to be quite honest, as an advocate. How to do it.
I mean, I think so. There's a quote by Maya Angelou that my mom has like always told me to remember. And I think it's like, it's people won't remember what you do or what you say. They'll remember how you made them feel.
That's exactly right. And she said something else, which is engraved in my skull. And she said, when people show you who they are, always believe them the first time. Meaning, Maya Angelou was saying the same thing. Watch what people do, not what they say, kind of thing. And that's wisdom, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wish I had it. I wish I had it when I was your age. I wish somebody had told me that, but I wouldn't have believed them. I wouldn't have assimilated it.
Right.
So maybe some people maybe we all have to learn these things emotionally from our disappointments, but we haven't got to see what interests me so much about you, because, and we haven't said this, so I'm chairman of the board of Gray is Green, the National Senior Conservation Corps. So I spend a lot of my time and energy on environmental work. And so I worry about this because I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, how do we get people to feel this? Not just to think it, not just to know, oh yeah, I read the statistics about greenhouse gas emissions. That's not going to cut it politically, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what will.
Yeah. And I mean, I think so. Taking a step back for a moment is one of the things I would say is, as as we started off this conversation of like, what do intergenerational and co-generations, the dialogues that form, what do they have to offer? It's this kind of a conversation. It's the statement that you just made. I wish someone had told me this information when I was your age.
But I wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah, you may not have, but the thing is having a conversation like this actually reinforces the belief of it, even if it still stays in like the conscious mind, even if it doesn't assimilate in a greater depth, you're actually what you're saying will get through to me more because it's incorporated with all of your personal experiences. It feels personal. This doesn't feel like reading it out of a textbook. Right. It doesn't feel like a teacher lecturing at a classroom.
That's right.
So there's a more inherent level. There's a more emotionally evolved level, which it's going to come at me with. Right. So I think that's the first thing is it's like having these conversations I'm actually learning in such a way that is deeply personal, deeply entrenched in the personal. And that's a critical thing. That's something that it's like conversations between generations, between elders and young people can have that format, that impact on an individual, is that it can be personal. You have a way, and that's something that I talk about in my work. It's like exactly what you're talking about is the message. It's like, I learned this. So throughout my 6th grade year, I did a project with my mom called The Kindness Journey. And so we traveled around the country. That
sweatshirt, I'm reading, sit up a little bit, spread kindness. You're still spreading the message.
Yeah. Oh yes. This sweatshirt.
Back to your project in 6th grade. I want to hear about it.
Yeah. So my project in 6th grade, my mom essentially is, I was going to be heading off to middle school. I was trying to get into a magnet school in Portland, Oregon, that was all about teaching experientially. And essentially to be able to get into the school, it was just a lottery. It was no academics wise, it was completely random. And so they had 2 spots open for the incoming 6th grade. And there was like 40, 60 something people that were trying to get the spots. And so my mom basically would stay up because I was like so into getting into this school. And so my mom was up late at night doing her parent thing where she worries about her child. Yeah, and I know. I'm totally doing that. And one of the things that happened is, so she was scrolling through Facebook at one night in early wee hours of the morning and saw this thing that a father did with his 2 daughters of traveling around the world and doing something called voluntourism, and volunteering seeing new places. And my mom thought, wow, I've really wanted to travel with Jaden. We hadn't traveled as much as she'd wanted to. And she thought this would be such an incredible opportunity to travel and help me pursue this passion, which I was finding of social justice. And so she worked and did a bunch of research and brought me this really cool idea of traveling around the country for a year, doing random acts of kindness, doing volunteer work, and having me speak in schools as a young person to other young people about the importance of kindness and compassion in our everyday lives.
What happened? You did it?
We did it. So we went traveling for the year.
Unbelievable.
Right? It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And I mean, it's one of the experiences that I will always remember in my life. We spent a year, we packed up our car, we stayed in 12 different cities around the country and did volunteer work. I learned about the country around me through having real conversations with people. And the biggest thing that I really drew from it is, as I gave more and more presentations up on stage, because it was the whole conversation of how that even started was hilarious. Is my mom comes to me and says, how would you feel about talking to other kids your age about, kindness and compassion and what your take on it is? And I said, well, I've only ever done presentations. At this point, I'm in 5th grade still. I'm still trying to finish 5th grade. And I'd only ever done presentations in front of my class that was like 25 people. And even then it was kind of like, I needed a whole week just to like settle myself and prepare. And I was like, okay, so maybe we could start at like my class size of like 20 people. And then over the year,
start small.
And over the year, we could work up to 80 or 100 people.
Right. Did she buy it?
She was like, yeah, absolutely. And then the very first presentation that I gave was to a Boys and Girls Club for 80 to 100 people. So I just got thrown in right at the end goal.
And you did it.
And I did it. And it was scary at first. And, it's like that a couple days later after that Boys and Girls presentation, I was on the news for the very first time in this local town. We were in Missoula, Montana. And it was just this it was a wild experience. But the thing that I very much started to learn is that I was giving more and more presentations to more young people. And I started to recognize for myself is the presentation that I gave was it was personal to me, but it still had a lot of this, like, it felt, I was trying to learn about public speaking and how do I come with my voice and stand up on a stage in front of all of these people and be comfortable. And the more that I learned to feel comfortable, I also was learning, we were working with an organization, a national organization called Life Vest Inside, that was also about spreading the message of kindness. And the founder was she'd spoken on the TED main stage, and she had just a very captivating, empowering way that she spoke. And so I learned a lot from her. And she came, and when she would speak, it was in this extremely personal, extremely real, human way. And the more that I heard her speak and the more that I learned about speaking, the more I recognized is that it's not about, you can't come. It's like, as I've gone through education, I've learned all the different terms, whether it's psychology or marketing or business and brand development, whatever you want to call it. It's like, you can't come from in a factualized way and convince somebody. It doesn't work as much.
It doesn't work.
It's the reason why it's like that. In psychology, we were just learning about how it's like, that's called the centralized technique. And that there's this more overt way, which is how much more of the information that we consume is communicated, which is through personal stories. It's through anecdotes. It's through real connection. And
absolutely right. Absolutely.
And so I think it's like that is where that journey is where I started to understand is it's like, I'm not going to convince somebody by showing them a bunch of facts and numbers. It can support what I'm doing, but I can't sit down with a fact sheet.
This discussion is great because you agree with me about why can't just use facts, but you've actually proved my point, which was I was trying to say, wait a minute, do we elders really have anything that we can give to the young? And my implication was, no, they have to learn it on their own. And you've just described learning on your own. And by the way, this has particular meaning to me because I have been a professional speaker during much of my life. It's how I've earned money, not just as an academic, but going around the country, bearing my soul to people, talking about things. And I've taught public speaking too, using video, replay, the whole 9 yards. And what I realized is that, wait a minute, Jaden learned all this stuff completely on his own. He made all the mistakes. He learned from the mistakes. He found a good mentor, a good person to guide him, but he basically blundered ahead, even when he wasn't, quote, ready.
Well, I mean, I think to an extent, yes. And I think that at the same time, I mean, I really feel I think that there is an amount, it's like, there is a spectrum of support that you need to be able to grow in a way that is supportive of being who I am or who you're meant to be in the world, of really reaching your own full potential. And I think that it's like, this hasn't been a journey where I got up on stages and was just like, I'm just going to go at it. And I had those moments.
Right.
I had those moments, but it was also combined with the fact that it's like, I had all these people around me that would have conversations with me, who were my elders, who were my mentors, who would sit down and say, yeah, so, one of the most impactful things that happened when I was speaking was actually my biggest mistake that I ever made is I was in an auditorium in front of 600 middle schoolers. And I got up on stage and I had note cards to guide me through this presentation.
And
And
you
I
lost the
looked
note cards.
down, they were all out of order.
I know. I've had the
And
experience too.
I looked up and I looked at my mom, this complete and utter fear. And then I looked back at the audience and I said, "Excuse me for a second." And I stood up on stage all alone, this little sixth grader, like, what do I know? And I reorganized my note cards for, it took me a minute. And it was the
Right.
worst minute of my entire life because it's very quiet in an
It's very
auditorium.
quiet while they're waiting for you to speak.
Oh, yeah. And
Yes.
so, but it was that moment because the thing that is so impactful is that was my mistake. That was my thing. I
Right,
walked up, I
right.
had to handle it.
Right. You had to
But it
handle
was
it.
me coming back off of the stage and me sitting down and my mom saying, there are so many things that I'm proud of you of, but what you just did is something that I'm most proud of you of. It's
Yes.
that statement, it's that reminder, it's having my mentor say to me, it's like, I've made those mistakes before, and the way you handled it is graceful and powerful and empowering.
And I love that. And I want to capture a phrase that you used, spectrum of support. And
Yeah.
you actually went like this with your hands. And I think that's critical in terms, if we can give some advice to our good friend Rick Lathrop, who's listening to this, I know, about co-generations, it really is to try to understand better what that spectrum of support is and how we can, I won't say engineer it, but think about it and help people prepare for it. Because otherwise, if we just throw young people and old people together and say, oh, you ought to spend more time together, this ain't going to work.
Yep.
There are problems
Well,
going to arise there.
I think that it's I think there's so many different pieces here. I think that it's like the first thing we need to get at. I think that we're not even in our current society today. The unfortunate thing is we're not even at, for the majority of us, that spectrum of support. I've learned to really have a large appreciation for my elders because of what my mom has taught me, because of how she has educated me and how she has socialized me in the world. Is I've learned to have a lot of respect for people who are older than me because they have wisdom to share. I remember as like I would be in first and second grade and we had someone that was living with us who was she was in her 60s, 70s, something like that. And she I don't remember what her role was within a church, but she had a role in a church. And I remember having these conversations with her, and it's like, I'm only a first or second grader and I'm growing up and I'm learning, but there was so much that she had to offer. And there was so much that she had that was profound wisdom that it's like, I didn't even know.
You've had the great good fortune to have a paradigm of intergenerational connection in your household, okay?
Yeah.
20 feet, 50 feet away from where you're sitting right now is where it takes place because that's your home. Yeah. And so, in a sense, I could say, oh, that's great. Jaden is a great example of this. And of course you are. But then I step back and I say, well, how can we extend this more widely? And your example of spending a year in this education travel program, voluntourism, whatever you want to call it, to me, it's fantastic. Truth in advertising. My wife and I had both our two kids at home in a parent cooperative homeschool. They were homeschooled for 5 years. Then they went back to regular schools. But so I'm obviously in tune with this kind of radical approach to education. But still, I think to myself, well, wait a minute, how do we generalize this? We can't all grow up in Jaden Wynn's household. How do we promote this?
I think it starts, I think this is what I was getting at, is it's like, we're not at the spectrum of support yet place. We're not trying to understand it because we, and as a society of like, for much of the younger generation, we've forgotten the importance of having relationships with our elders. I think that they
didn't have the experience that you've had. So you were
exactly
predisposed to be listening.
I've had a huge level of privilege to have the experiences that I've had, which most people aren't subject to. And
that's a very good point. Very important point.
Yeah. So I think it's like, for the majority of young people out there, there's not a whole lot in our modern society that promotes this idea that elders are an important part of life. I think it's like, one of the things I've always said to my mom is I've always said to her is like, when you get old, to hell am I going to put you in a home? Like, you're going to come live with me. We're going to have some like apartment in New York City. You're going to be like the badass grandmother, badass mom, like to hell that I'm putting you in a home. Like, I don't believe in that, because there's something that is inherently saying is it's like, no, 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 you go over here. You got old enough now that you go live over here. And I think that that's like,
Right.
that's the start and root of all of our problems, is we don't embrace,
Okay.
far less often do we see households where the grandmother comes and lives in the guest room. It's like they're put somewhere else. They come to visit.
Believe me, I know exactly what you're talking about, because my wife and I spent 7 years as caregivers for our dear friend Larry Morris, who lived in our house until he died at the age of 97. He was a family friend. He was not a relative in that sense. So I've been through it all in terms of caregiving and personal experience. But I ask myself, well, wait a minute, how do we generalize this? What do we do to help people? And you said something very important about that some younger people, you're a good example of it, are predisposed, are willing, are able to get some learning from the elder generation. But what learning is it that counts, that has a payoff for them? So for me, and this is something that we're going to have to talk to Rick Lathrop about, we have to really ask that question. It's like we do in marketing. You ask, what does it look like from the standpoint of the customer? Well, if the young people are the customer, what's the benefit for them of being with this older person? I can think of some hypotheticals. For example, as you and I talk further, I know you're not in college. You may never go to college. You may decide you want to go to college. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about, what I learned about getting into college, what I learned about how to succeed and fail in college. What I learned above all when I got out of college and discovered that, wait a minute, none of that stuff has anything to do with the real world. I've wasted my time. What do I do now? So, but we'll save that for future conversations. But anything that I can offer to you will be of that character, and will be stories. And I'm not just going to give you generalizations. I'll tell you exactly how I screwed it up and what went wrong. And maybe you'll benefit from it, maybe not. I don't know. But as I think about that, I think, well, that could be a payoff for a young person, not something else.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the important thing to look at is, it's like one of the things that I think, like, I often look at a lot of social justice issues. I think,
let's get back to social justice.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that elder care is an area of social justice. I think that it's an aspect. I mean, part of my concern is, like, one of the things is I'm deeply involved in the homelessness epidemic, and specifically youth homelessness. But more and more, what my concern is we're going to have, in a decade, we're going to have the baby boomers era of people that are getting to be older and older. And unless we as a society start to look at eldership in a different way, we're going to have a way overflow of elder people that are not going to have places. They're not, it's going to be in unsafe conditions. It's going to be in homes where they're going to fill up way too fast. I mean, the reality is we're not coping with this situation because we push people away. And the concern that I look at is, in a decade here, we're going to either have a huge growth in the homeless population of people over 65, which is already a huge, I mean, people over 65 is a large portion of the people who are at least in the wider idea of homelessness, maybe not physically living on the streets, but in unsafe conditions or bouncing around. There's a large percentage of people that are over 65. And I think that all that has to tell you is, it's like, that shows our mismanagement and our kind of like disownment of the elder population.
It's interesting that you say this, because just yesterday I saw the movie Nomadland.
I love that movie.
I love it too. I read the book, every single page of the book, a couple of months ago, because I have had a history myself. When I was running the Brookdale Center on Aging in Hunter College, we also housed people who were in charge of all the homeless training, for all the homeless shelters. It was a kind of educational function. Okay, so what does Frances McDormand say in that? Her character says in the movie, somebody says, "Are you homeless?" And she says, "No, I'm houseless." Yeah. Remember that great phrase? Yep. Okay. Now I thought to myself, wow, there's a real payoff there, because she resists being put into this category that people look down on. And this is a big problem in terms of, oppression, oppressed groups. We hear all about oppressed groups. We don't hear enough about the strengths of
Yeah.
oppressed groups. And maybe the
Yeah.
reason I know about this is because I spent a year as a school teacher, elementary school teacher in 1968 in Harlem. Okay. I was the white guy. Everybody's black around me. Believe me, that's a big shock when you're the only white guy in a whole room of people and they're all black. This was not my experience. I did not grow up. I grew up in a very privileged white world. But then the question is, well, how do I connect with people? And if I just think, oh my God, they're oppressed, I got to be guilty, that's not going to do the job. That's why I have been very enthusiastic lately about, if you may, Henry Louis Gates, the great scholar from Harvard, has a series about the Black church. I happen to be very interested in that, although I've been to some Black churches, but that's not my background. But I love the music. And so somehow along the way, with everything with slavery, oppression, somehow Black people figured out how to retain this dignity of music, which speaks to me today. So let's not forget that. And to me, that's part of the balancing act. This doesn't sentimentalize anything. It doesn't say we don't have obligations, but it says we need to think about this in a more comprehensive way. And that's true for both young and old. If I just dismiss you as, oh, Jaden, he's a young person, he needs to hear some wisdom, then I'm missing the boat. I'm going to miss it completely.
Yeah. And I mean, I think so. I think you just touched on like a wide array of
I know, I always do.
points.
Like Rather always reminds me, I go all over the map. It's true. Go.
No, and I mean, I love it. I love it. And I think that you did just really touch on a wide array of really important topics. And I think like really focusing on this idea of intergenerationalship is like there is such a, I think it's like, again, I put back to this place of people, we're like not, we are a, and I mean, I would almost like categorize this to white people. I've been going to a lot of Black Lives Matter and BIPOC protests, the vigils for people that are dying. And the continual thing that I continue to educate myself about is this idea of like what is becoming more and more known as like white comfort and white convenience. And I think that like as white people, we've in a lot of ways grown up in this like, we live extremely convenient lives. We show up when it's convenient for us. We do things when it's convenient for us. And
very, very well put.
Part of
very
right.
Well
and convenience is comfort, and comfort is inherently embracing the white supremacist structure and not being anti-racist actively. You know, like I'm, for whatever the gazillionth time is, I go out on my runs and I'm listening to the audiobook of Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Again, it's just like this like ritual that I have for myself of like, I just every couple months, and
you're reaching beyond your own limited experience and
exactly.
You're recognizing your limits.
But I think that for a lot of especially white people, and I would almost even push even further to say like the white male figure in America, the white cisgender straight male that is not facing a level of oppression and the hardships and difficulties that society puts in front of groups who are not the white cis straight male, is like we are incredibly apathetic and we do what's convenient for us and we do what's comfortable. And it's such a time of like every social issue requires us to step out of our own comfort. It requires us to be uncomfortable. It requires us to embrace pain and discomfort to grow and learn. I mean, it's like, I think of like the idea of like, there's a medical term of growing pains. Like that is a medical thing.
Yes, there is.
It's not comfortable to grow. It's not like, it's not easy. And I think that it's like, when you look at these things, like intergenerational discussion, like even talking with people that are elders, it isn't something that is particularly always going to be comfortable until you get to understand and get to feel okay in this space. But for plenty of young people, it may not be comfortable.
Right.
You're not, me having a conversation with you is so vastly different than me having a conversation with one of my classmates. The topics, the ideas, the way that I communicate is so vastly different. And that for a young person may be uncomfortable to start out.
And that's what eventually when we get, I think it was Peter Drucker who said every great idea eventually degenerates into work. And at some point, we're going to degenerate into work, into trying to figure out how intergenerational connection can move forward. And I'm going to come back
Mhm.
to the same point about stories. Because if, and marketing, your mother I know is involved with marketing. If our marketing campaign is, hey, we want to make you feel uncomfortable, we're not going to succeed. Okay.
Yeah.
We may make people feel uncomfortable along the way, as in Nomadland. Let's go back to that film where some people I know have said to me, I can't tell you how much I cried when I saw that movie. Right. Well, that's a kind of discomfort in a way, but there are many ways of crying. And there's many, and sometimes people can cry out of joy and cry out of recognition. And I guess if we could begin to find the stories that will evoke the connections,
Yeah.
then we will be successful. I don't know what those stories are. I really don't. I haven't got them figured out, but
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's like one of the things, again, I was talking a little bit earlier, is just about how I see social justice issues as very generational.
yes.
I think it's like in every in pretty much every aspect, there's a level of socialization which goes into social justice issues. There's a level of the time and the era, the education, the technology, the platforms that are available. All of
Yep.
this like
Yep.
incorporates into an amalgamation of what is the social justice aspect of an era. And I think right now we're living in this era of like there is a huge push from environmental justice organizations. I mean, like, there is a built clock in New York that is counting down these seconds
Oh,
to
yes.
when
I
climate
know that.
justice is, when climate change it becomes really irreversible and the effects start becoming permanent in our world. Like,
Yes.
that is something that is just new. It's new for my generation of young people. And so there is a level of fear and invigoration and passion and motivation, which comes from there's a clock that literally says 7 years and it goes 27 seconds, 26 seconds, 25 seconds.
And by the way, as you may or may not know, this was originally invented by the Union of Atomic Scientists in the Journal of Atomic Scientists, who in 1946 or 47, when I was 2 years old, developed their clock. And when the international situation got really bad, the hand would get closer to the midnight, and then it would get better, go a little bit away. In other words, it goes up and down. It wasn't quite like climate change. But so, in a sense, you're describing something, it has to be reinvented. We're often
Right.
reinventing and rediscovering things that other people have learned. I had nothing to do with the atomic scientists, by the way, but I just happen to remember that because I
Yeah.
grew up in the 1950s when we had duck and cover in the schools. So I did duck
Right.
and cover as an elementary school student in the 1950s. That's not your world. And in a sense,
Hmm.
you have a climate change is a different kind of threat than atomic war. I mean, atomic
Yeah.
war hasn't completely gone away, but certainly it has it's a different salience than climate change. And we're
Right.
going to have to talk about this in the future, by the way, Jaden. I have lots, we don't have time today to get into all of it, but I have a lot of details because I've been a longtime donor and member of the Long Now Foundation. And I have a book coming out later this year called Leaving a Legacy, Our Aging Society and Future Generations, all about environmental issues. I'm not going to talk about that today. I just did. But what I want to say is that you and I have to get this down to something where you can give me examples of people of your own age who have had something positive. We also need to talk about the negative experiences, things that didn't work, the
Right.
households that didn't have your mother, or the people
Yeah.
my age who said, I can't tell you, I can't get through to my daughter. She never listens, or that type of thing. I mean, we have all those stories, good
Yep.
and bad.
Well,
We
and I
need to think
think,
about
yeah, and I think this all goes back to the fact of it's like one of the things that I really look at is it's like increasingly, so there's two films, one that's coming out, one that came out a couple years ago that I love, hugely passionate about. So the one that came out a couple of years ago, I actually did an interview conversation with the producer of the film, of the
what's the film?
documentary. It's called American Street Kid.
I heard the
Um,
name somewhere. Yeah,
yeah, it's become a very popular film and it's discussing the youth homelessness epidemic and it's centered around some personal stories and it's all filmed in Venice Beach. So
I
it's
know
just
Venice
focused in
Beach.
Venice Beach
Sure,
area.
Los Angeles.
And it's a guy that went out and he was going to make a PSA about youth homelessness and it became a multi-year project where he
Wow, wow.
got
Took him
deeply
over.
engaged. It
Yeah,
completely took him over and he became deeply connected and engaged with these young people that are on the streets and began telling their individual stories. It's a hugely impactful. I mean, I was like bawling the entire movie. Like
I
it's a
want to
very
see. I'll
impactful
make sure
film.
we'll talk about how I can
And
see that. What's